The Treaty of Utrecht in 1713 had left North America's three colonial powers, the French, Spanish, and British, unsatisfied with their gains and losses on the continent. Unlike King William's War and Queen Anne's War, which had been punctuated by just 4 years of peace, the interval between Queen Anne's War and King George's War was punctuated by 30. This gave valuable time for all three nations to prepare against one another for yet another bloody clash to decide the fate of North America. Part 1. An Uneasy Peace. After the Treaty of Utrecht, France's King Louis XIV died in 1715. The War of the Spanish Succession left France broke, its trade weakened, and it lost Acadia, now Nova Scotia, to Britain. Louis XIV's aggressive foreign policy made other European countries see France as a threat that had to be contained. After 63 years as king, Louis XIV was gone, and France needed a wise leader. Instead, they got his 5-year-old great-grandson, Louis XV, who was under the control of an incompetent regent. Spain faced similar problems. Even though Spain was now linked to France by family ties, they were not allowed to form an alliance or unite as one nation. Spain's strict church rules and bad leadership held the country back. Its American colonies remained tightly controlled, able to defend themselves but unable to grow or expand. Britain was the opposite of France and Spain. Unlike France, where the king had all the power, Britain's parliament could limit any bad decisions by the monarchy. Britain's economy thrived, partly due to the Asunto de Negros, a profitable contract allowing them to sell African slaves to Spanish colonies for 30 years. After Queen Anne died in 1714, George I, a German who did not speak English, became king. He depended on the government, which helped strengthen his power. The situation in Europe was reflected in North America. Britain's colonies grew fast, with their population doubling from 200,000 in 1689 to 400,000 by 1715. New generations born in America believed that they were meant to explore and take over new lands. These colonies drew in many ambitious people from Europe, like Scots, Swiss, Germans, and French Huguenots, who found freedom and opportunity in America. In contrast, New France stayed small and tightly controlled, with only little growth in its population. Life was tough, and many, like its soldiers, planned to go back to France when their time was up. Spanish Florida also stayed tiny, with fewer than 2,000 white settlers, including its soldiers. For the 30 years after the War of the Spanish Succession, France and Britain were technically at peace, but there were still some clashes. Spain fought with both France and Britain. During this time, France expanded into Louisiana, building new forts and settlements. Fort Toulouse in 1713, now Montgomery, Alabama. Fort Roselle in 1714, now Natchez, Mississippi. And New Orleans in 1718, at the mouth of the Mississippi River. Worried about this expansion, Carolina built its own forts, notably Fort King George, near the mouth of the Altamaha River, which Spain claimed. Despite Spain's protests, Britain kept the fort. In 1727, Spain declared war on both Britain and France. The war lasted only a few months, but the threat of a Muskogee Creek attack on Port Royal forced the Carolinians to withdraw from Fort King George. Meanwhile, in Maine, conflicts grew over the unclear boundaries of Acadia. When France controlled Acadia, they said it included all of modern Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Maine up to the Kennebec River. When the British took over in 1713, France backtracked, claiming Acadia only included the Nova Scotia Peninsula. the British stuck to the former definition, and settlers began to settle beyond the Kennebec. Between 1722 and 1727, the bloody Drummers' War erupted as the local Abenaki tribes fought back against the British settlers moving into their land. The French did not openly support the Abenaki in the war, but still showed interest in the region. In 1720, they built a strong fortress at Louisbourg on Cape Breton Island. This was to keep control of the area, help their fishing industry, replace the loss of Port Royal, now Annapolis Royal in Acadia, and defend against attacks from New England. When Quebec couldn't supply Louisbourg in the winter, the fort relied on illegal trade with New England. To counter Louisbourg, New York's Governor William Burnet set up a trading post at Oswego on Lake Ontario in 1728 to draw in fur traders. In response, the French built Fort St. Frederick at Lake Champlain's southern tip in 1731. Meanwhile, in 1732, Britain started the colony of Georgia, just south of South Carolina. It was meant as a new home for poor debtors and soldiers and as a defense against Spanish Florida. James Oglethorpe, a military officer, led this effort. He founded Savannah and made deals with local tribes to protect the colony. Despite Spain's objections, he built Fort Frederica on St. Simon's Island to strengthen Georgia's defenses. Part 2. The War of Jenkins' Ear. In the spring of 1738, Captain Robert Jenkins showed up to a British parliamentary meeting. He presented his severed ear. He told them that the Spanish had cut it off when they caught him smuggling slaves under the Asiento Agreement, which, as a reminder, allowed the British to sell up to 4,800 African slaves in Spanish colonies and send only one ship of goods each year. However, many British merchants, including Jenkins, bribed Spanish officials to exceed these limits. Both countries agreed they could search each other's ships for illegal goods. The Spanish caught Jenkins in 1731 and cut off his ear as punishment. This was a better outcome compared to what happened to a Dutch captain who lost his hand and was forced to eat it. Jenkins stayed quiet for a while, until public anger against Spain's harsh treatment of captured sailors grew. When Jenkins finally told his story, he became a hero. He claims that, during the mutilation, he declared that, "I commend my soul to God and my cause to my country." His words ignited patriotic calls for war across Britain. The British Parliament condemned the search agreement, forcing Prime Minister Robert Walpole to act. Spain offered £95,000 in damages but refused to punish their captains or stop searching British ships. When a young William Pitt criticized Spain, Walpole declared war in October 1739. In America, Oglethorpe led an attack on Spanish Florida. He tried to seize St. Augustine, but his forces were too small, and the ships could not get close enough. After suffering losses, he ended the siege on July 20, 1740. Although the Spanish suffered heavy losses too, Oglethorpe was criticized for his failure. Attention then shifted to the Caribbean. Admiral Edward Vernon captured the important port of Portobello in Panama with just 6 ships in 1739, earning widespread praise. Lawrence Washington, a captain who served in the campaign, even named his Virginian plantation Mount Vernon after him. Vernon was then sent to capture Cartagena, Colombia, in 1741. The British recruited many American colonists, but poor leadership and disease caused the campaign to fail. Only 600 out of 3,500 American recruits survived, creating bitterness toward the British commanders. Meanwhile, tensions were rising in Europe. In late 1740, the Holy Roman Emperor Charles VI died without a male heir. He had allowed his daughter, Maria Theresa, to inherit Austria through the Pragmatic Sanction, but many European countries, including Prussia under Frederick, challenged her claim. Britain then backed Austria, and Europe soon plunged into the War of the Austrian Succession. Spain and France saw this as a chance to regain territories like Gibraltar and Minorca, and to weaken British influence in America once again. In June 1742, a large group of Spanish ships appeared near St. Simon's Island, heading for Fort Frederica. The Spanish landed about 4 miles south of the fort with over 3,000 men. This force included Cuban troops led by Don Antonio Arredondo and around 600 Floridian soldiers under Governor de Montiano. Oglethorpe, with only 650 men, including indigenous and local militia, outsmarted the Spanish. He tricked them into retreating, leaving many hundreds dead and captured. Soon after, 3 British warships arrived, forcing the Spanish to abandon their supplies and dead. When the Spanish learned just how small Oglethorpe's force was, Governor de Montiano was criticized, and Arredondo was jailed in Havana. Oglethorpe was praised throughout the colonies. In March 1743, Oglethorpe attacked St. Augustine, but could only damage the area around it before returning. The Spanish never tried to attack Georgia again. Oglethorpe returned to Britain in September, partly to defend himself against complaints from another officer, but mainly to convince Parliament to protect Georgia as an important defense point for the Southern American colonies. Oglethorpe did not return to Georgia and instead rose up the ranks to become a full general. By then, Britain's focus had shifted to France, their new main enemy. In June, King George II led his troops into the Netherlands, where they were attacked by the French, even though the countries were still officially at peace. The Battle of Deningen was the last time a British king led an army into battle. The conflict then grew, leading Britain and France to declare war in March 1744. The War of the Austrian Succession had now spread to the Americas in the form of King George's War. Part 3. The Gibraltar of the New World. News of the declaration of war reached the British colonies 2 months later in May, but it got to Cape Breton Island and Louisbourg sooner. Ever since its construction in 1720, Louisbourg had gained a formidable reputation. Dubbed the Gibraltar of the New World due to its strategic location on Cape Breton Island, the fort was heavily fortified with 30-foot-high stone walls and 250 cannons. From its position, it controlled the mouth of the St. Lawrence River, and from there, the entryway to Quebec, Montreal, and the rest of Canada. On May 14th, the French sent Captain Francis Duvivier with 600 men from Louisbourg to capture the nearby British fishing village of Canso in Nova Scotia. By capturing this village, the British could no longer use it to sever communication with Louisbourg to the rest of Canada. The village had a wooden fort who surrendered quickly. The British surrendered on the condition that they be sent to Boston, but the French took them to Louisbourg instead. Encouraged by their quick win, the French attacked Annapolis Royal next. Duvivier led the attack, but the British held firm despite the poor state of their fort. Duvivier hoped for reinforcements from 2 French warships, but they refused to arrive. The local Acadians also refused to help, except to build ladders. When British reinforcements arrived, Duvivier retreated back to Louisbourg. The British soldiers captured at Canso were finally transported to Boston, and with them, They brought very valuable intelligence. Louisbourg was in a rather derelict state. It had an undermanned garrison and very few cannons, and the Grand Battery, which overlooked Louisbourg with its own guns, was damaged and in need of repairs. The governor of Massachusetts, William Shirley, saw this as an excellent opportunity to attack. William Pepperell, a popular but inexperienced military colonel, was chosen to lead the expedition. Commodore Peter Warren was tasked to support the attack with 4 warships from the Caribbean. Thousands of men and dozens of ships gathered in Boston, supported by neighboring colonies. By late March 1745, the forces began to set sail with confidence, ready to fight. By late April, the large fleet arrived at Louisbourg. The American landing happened a mile away with little resistance. The Americans kept landing until May 1st and set up camp near Louisbourg. 400 soldiers went to check out the Grand Battery, finding it empty, and took control. The French had left it during the night, thinking they couldn't defend it. They damaged the cannons beforehand, but the Americans brought tools to fix them. On May 3rd, the French tried to retake the battery by sending a force in small boats, but they were pushed back. The next day, the Americans got 3 cannons working and started firing at Louisbourg. Their luck continued when Commodore Warren captured a French supply ship full of food and goods. With these supplies, Pepperell demanded the town surrender, but the French commander, Louis de Champollion, refused. The Americans continued to fire muskets at anyone seen above the fort walls. When a French warship appeared, Warren chased and captured it, adding more cannons, crew, and munitions to the Americans. The Americans set up a new battery at Lighthouse Point and, by June 10th, fired on the island battery in the middle of the harbor. Louisbourg was badly damaged by this point, and one gate was partially destroyed. Frustrated by the slow siege, Warren and Pepperell planned a joint attack. Just before they attacked, however, the French raised a flag of truce, leading to negotiations and the forced surrender on June 17th. The French were allowed to keep their belongings, but were sent back to France. The siege of Louisbourg was costly for the British. Governor Shirley reported 101 men killed and about 30 more who died from disease. Fever and dysentery hit about 1,500 men before the town surrendered. The British took command of Louisbourg, and repairs on the fortress began. Holding the town proved harder than capturing it, with camp diseases killing 890 new English troops by the spring of 1746. News of the victory brought celebrations in America and Britain. Warren was promoted to admiral and became governor of Louisbourg, while Pepperell became a baronet. But the cost of holding Louisbourg dampened the joy, as many soldiers wanted to return home as quickly as possible to escape the sickness. Part 4. New France invades. The capture of Louisbourg was the key battle of King George's War, but it was just one of many. In 1745, indigenous raids began, scaring British settlers. Governor George Clinton of New York tried to secure help from the Iroquois. Clinton got the Iroquois to agree to stay neutral. They wouldn't help either the French or the British unless attacked. He also appointed William Johnson, who became a trusted diplomat with the Mohawks. Massachusetts tried a similar plan with the Abenaki, but it failed and led to open war. Massachusetts built 3 forts between the Connecticut River and the New York border, manned by hundreds of soldiers. These forts probably faced raids in the summer. New York thought they were safe until a Franco-Indigenous force attacked Saratoga in November, killing 30 and capturing 60, including many African slaves. Raids continued into 1476. After failing to take Fort No. 4 in New Hampshire, a large French force attacked Fort Massachusetts at present-day North Adams. Meanwhile, Governor Shirley, still riding the high of the capture of Louisbourg, pushed for an invasion of Quebec. The American colonies eagerly supported the plan, and thousands of militia prepared to join. The plan even won over the British Secretary of State, the Duke of Newcastle, but the British troops never arrived. They were instead sent on a failed raid of the French coast instead. Shirley then planned to use his troops to attack Fort St. Frederick on Lake Champlain, but harrowing news from Nova Scotia changed everything. A huge French fleet led by the Duc d'Anville was sailing to retake Louisbourg and destroy Boston. The fleet, 65 ships and 3,100 troops strong, left in June, but fate had other plans. A storm hit near Africa, sinking a ship and spreading disease. By September, another storm near Nova Scotia caused more damage, and many men died. D'Anville died of a stroke, and his replacement, Vice Admiral d'Etremesnil, committed suicide after a disagreement. The next in command, the Marquis de la Jonquière, tried to regroup and gather supplies from local Acadians. He set up camp, but disease continued to spread. By October, 2,400 of his men were dead. He decided to head for Annapolis Royal, but another storm scattered the fleet. On October 27th, they chose to return to France. On the way back, more storms hit, and they lost even more men. The mission ended in total failure, without a single shot fired. The death toll of d'Anville's doomed expedition numbered higher than all of King George's War. Despite failure, King Louis XV tried again in 1747, sending another fleet under La Jonquière. 4 days out, they met a British fleet led by Admiral Warren. The British captured 6 French ships, including the flagship, and won the battle. Warren was elected to Parliament soon after for his success. Also in 1747, French forces increased their attacks after the British plan to invade Canada failed. Jean-Roch Desarmes heard that troops from Massachusetts were stationed at Grand Pre, Nova Scotia. He sent Coulon de Villiers to attack them in the middle of winter. Villiers, with the help of local Acadians and indigenous allies, launched a surprise assault. Over 300 British soldiers took shelter in a large stone building, but surrendered the next day after fierce fighting. The French retreated afterwards. The British returned to Grand Pre in April. Around the same time, 700 French troops marched towards the Connecticut River to capture Fort No. 4, defended by Captain Phineas Stevens, and just 30 men. After days of skirmishes, the French gave up and left. For his efforts, Commodore Charles Knowles of the British Navy awarded Stevens a sword, and the settlement was renamed Charlestown. In August, Britain and France began exchanging prisoners, releasing hundreds on both sides. In Boston, conflict broke out when Commodore Knowles tried to impress local sailors into the Royal Navy. This led to a 3-day riot where Bostonians protested the forced conscription. After taking hostages and causing widespread damage, the riot was eventually resolved. To the south, the War of Jenkins' Ear was revived when the Spanish launched a few raids on the southern coast of America, hitting Beaufort, North Carolina in August 1747, and then Brunswick in September 1748. Both raids were rather insignificant to the wider war and achieved little. These minor skirmishes coincided with peace talks in Europe. More prisoners were exchanged in August, signaling the end of the war. The Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle was signed on October 18, 1748, and news of it reached Boston by Christmas. Amongst the articles of the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle, King Louis XV demanded the return of Cape Breton Island and Louisbourg to protect the St. Lawrence River. King George II agreed, partly because Britain was getting Madras back in India, and expanding territory was not a priority for his ministers. Outside of this exchange, no changes were made in America. The Laws of Louisbourg, a siege constructed and conducted primarily by American-born soldiers and officers, was interpreted as a bitter insult from the British. In Europe, Maria Theresa was confirmed as the ruler of Austria, but Prussia kept Silesia, which it had seized in 1740. Spain got none of the land it wanted, but agreed to renew the Assiento with Britain for 4 years. But the topic of the right to search each other's ships, which had started the War of Jenkins' Ear, was not addressed. For many Acadians, the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle did not bring peace like they hoped. The British governors did not trust the local Acadians. Were these French settlers, Catholic in faith, loyal to British rule, or did they still harbor loyalties to their former French overlords? This question came to a head in 1749 when the British founded Halifax on Nova Scotia's southeastern coast. Halifax quickly became the colony's capital, filled with thousands of Protestant settlers. Soon after, Nova Scotia's governor, Edward Cornwallis, demanded that the Acadians swear unconditional oaths of loyalty to the British. They refused. The local Micmac peoples did not accept the British either. They saw Halifax as an invasion of their land, which a previous 1726 treaty had guaranteed them. They threatened war if the British did not leave. Violence soon broke out. Fighting started at Canso, where new English fishermen clashed with the Micmac. When Cornwallis called for revenge, the Micmac responded by attacking a sawmill near Halifax, causing panic and leaving the settlement exposed. The French saw this unrest as an opportunity. They tried to increase their influence in Beaubassin, an Acadian village at the Chignecto Isthmus that connects Nova Scotia with the rest of North America. The British, however, claimed Beaubassin. One Frenchman, a Catholic priest named Jean-Louis Le Loutre, wanted to create a new settlement deeper in the contested area and fight the British. Some Micmac supported his plan, while others feared that fighting could mean losing their lands or becoming dependent on the French. Those who supported him moved to Fort Beauséjour. In 1750, Le Loutre forced the Acadians in Beaubassin to move to Fort Beauséjour, burning their village to make them comply. This made the British even more suspicious of Acadian loyalties. Le Loutre offered to help the displaced Acadians, but had made himself deeply unpopular by burning their homes. It did not help his case that he and his men often turned to violent means to deal with the British: terrorism, guerrilla warfare, and indiscriminate killing of innocent people. This, in turn, created hundreds of displaced refugees. With tensions rising, Cornwallis sent troops to the area under Charles Lawrence. Lawrence soon realized he was outnumbered and pulled back. Cornwallis, frustrated, resigned. In 1752, a Micmac chief named Jean-Baptiste Coppée asked the British for peace. The new governor, Peregrine Hopson, agreed, allowing the Micmac to live and hunt undisturbed. But Coppée's influence was limited, and he failed to win broader support for the peace. Hopson eventually left due to illness, and Charles Lawrence, who took over as acting governor, pushed hard for unconditional loyalty from the Acadians. Knowing that they would refuse, he used this as a reason to start expelling all of them from Nova Scotia, treating them as outright enemies. Meanwhile, a young George Washington was marching through the Ohio River Valley. Like Nova Scotia, the Ohio Valley was another hotspot for British and French conflicts that emerged after the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle. By 1754, it became clear that the two colonial powers were on a fast-paced collision course for their fourth war, the one that would change the continent forever.